Search for Tomorrow is an American soap opera that aired on CBS from September 3, 1951 to March 26, 1982, and on NBC from March 29, 1982 to December 26, 1986. At the time of its final broadcast, it was the longest-running non-news program on television. This record would later be broken by Hallmark Hall of Fame, which premiered on Christmas Eve 1951 and still airs occasionally. The show was created by Roy Windsor and was first written by Agnes Nixon for 13 weeks and, later, by Irving Bendig. The program was one of several packaged from the 1950s through the 1980s by Procter & Gamble Productions, the broadcasting arm of the famed Household Products Corporation, who were also responsible for the likes of Guiding Light, As the World Turns, The Edge of Night, and Another World. Transmission to tape. Search for Tomorrow aired as a 15-minute serial from its debut in 1951 until 1968, at 12:30 p.m., 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Procter & Gamble used the show to advertise mainly Joy dishwashing liquid and Spick & Span household cleaner. As the show's ratings increased, other sponsors began buying commercial time. Both Joy and Spick & Span continued to be the primary products Procter & Gamble advertised on the show, well into the 1960s. The serial discontinued live broadcasts in favor of recorded telecasts in March 1967, began broadcasting in color on September 11, 1967, and expanded to a half-hour on September 9, 1968, keeping the 12:30, 11:30 slot while its old 15-minute partner, The Guiding Light, also expanded to 30 minutes, moved to the CBS afternoon lineup at 2:30, 1:30. At the time, Search for Tomorrow and The Guiding Light, which had shared the same half-hour for 16 years, were the last two 15-minute soap operas airing on television. Search for Tomorrow would remain the top-rated show at 12:30, 11:30 until well into the late 1970s. Despite strong competition from shows like NBC's The Who, What, or Where Game and ABC's Split Second and Ryan's Hope. In 1983, both a master copy and the backup of an episode of Search for Tomorrow were lost, and on August 4, the cast was forced to do a live show for the first time since the transition 16 years before. Title sequences. Throughout its entire 35-year run, Search for Tomorrow's title sequence featured clouds passing through the sky. In fact, the sequence consisted entirely of that until 1981. The only noticeable change was the slightly altered S in Search, starting in 1967, at the time of the show's color switch. In late 1981, the show began using a videotaped opening sequence with a shot of a seagull flying over the ocean, and a helicopter shot of the clouds in the midday sky. In the show's final months, the titles featured a montage of cast clips, bookended with sky shots and a redesign of the title to fit with the times. The theme music for the early years sounded a little like Beyond the Blue Horizon to some, which would have seemed quite appropriate for this show given the sequence. After the show switched to color in 1967, a theme titled Interchange by Bill Meader was used for the opening, and later on in 1974, a short-lived theme titled Signature for Search for Tomorrow by Ashley Miller. From October 7, 1974 to February 25, 1986, Search for Tomorrow used a pop ballad theme. We'll Search for Tomorrow by John Silberman, Jack Courtner, and John Barranco. Several arrangements were used during its 12-year run. Aside from the original version, the credits also used a more orchestral version, a salsa, disco-flavored version, a lounge version, and a vocal version of this theme for closing credits. 1986 marked the debut of a new, techno-rock, theme for the show by Bill Chinnock, called Somewhere in the Night. The version of this tune that played during the opening and end credits, however, was usually an instrumental version with a saxophone riff. Announcements. For much of the show's run on CBS, the announcer was Dwight Weist. When Weist departed the show to found his own public relations casting company, former rock music disc jockey Alison Steele assumed the announcing duties with similar announcements as above. Her jobs carried over into the first few years of NBC's run until Hal Sims took over in 1985 for the remainder of the series. Sims' involvement was limited to the opening credits sponsorship announcements. History of the show. 1950s. For the show's duration, Search for Tomorrow was centered on a Midwestern housewife named Joanne Gardner, who lived in a fictional town called Henderson. In the earlier years, Joanne's friends and next-door neighbors, Stuart and Marge Bergman, received much screen time as they commiserated with Joanne, usually over a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. At the beginning of the series, Stu and Marge had a young daughter named Janet. Most of Joanne's dilemmas in the early years were due to her dead husband Keith Barron's overbearing parents. They never liked her and were quite content with seizing Joanne and Keith's daughter Patty from the widow. After Keith died in 1952, Joanne started managing a hotel, the Motor Haven Inn. Local thugs in town saw Joanne as soft because she was a woman, and they attempted to take over the business as a front for mafia dealings. Joanne's friend Rose Peabody, who was selling information to the mafia, tried to poison a pot of soup that Joanne made, so her credibility would be tarnished. In the end, she could not go through with it and poured the soup down the drain. A man named Arthur Tate helped Joanne with financial backing for the inn. Arthur's aunt Cornelia gave him the inheritance money but insisted on meddling in his affairs as she hated Joanne. Eventually, Arthur and Jo fell in love and were married in 1955. 1960s. After setting a record for the highest-rated soap opera of all time in its sophomore season, the show was one of the highest-rated soaps in the 1950s, but began losing out to newer serials as the decade drew to a close. When the show was in a ratings slump in 1960, Western-themed drama writers Frank and Doris Hersley were hired to write the show. Unfortunately, the new writers did nothing to help the ratings problem. In 1963, the show's ratings were still stagnant, and the duo decided to write out Joanne's baby by having him run in front of a speeding truck and die upon impact. Stewart was unhappy with the decision, and in the book All My Afternoons, Stewart was paraphrased as saying that she played the grief scenes with so much conviction that even the makeup lady could not bear to watch her to see if her makeup was right. In the end, the ratings didn't rise, and Stewart threatened to quit unless Mr. and Mrs. Hersley were fired. At once the duo left the show and subsequently created the serial General Hospital for ABC the same year. As the show progressed, Joanne's sister Eunice returned to town and seduced Joanne's second husband, Arthur Tate. When a woman named Marion Rand came to town and sued Arthur for paternity, the stress surrounding this dilemma, coupled with personal troubles and the guilt of sleeping with Eunice, caused him to have a fatal heart attack. Joanne's daughter Patty grew into a teenager and became involved with drug-dealing gang members. Joanne's friend Sam Reynolds proved his worth to Joanne by saving Patty when she was held at knife point. They were going to be married, but that event never came to pass. Actor Robert Mandan, who played Sam, did not renew his contract with the show. 1970s. In 1970, Joanne lost her eyesight, and Dr. Tony Vincente helped her get it back. They fell in love and were married in 1972. In 1974, Mary Ellis Bunham was appointed executive producer of Search for Tomorrow. As a result of Bunham wanting to take the show in a more youth-oriented direction, fewer stories involved Joanne. In 1975, Bunham was rumored to have the writers of Search for Tomorrow kill off Joanne, which ended up not happening after vocal dissent from Stewart in the press. While the ratings took a slight dip when the series focused on younger viewers, the impact was not as heavy as expected. Despite the show moving in a more youth-oriented direction, the character of Joanne embarked on a long-running story when she earned a foe in the ambitious schemer Stephanie Wilkins. In 1971, Stu and Marge's daughter Janet returned to the series and served as a peer to which Joanne's daughter Patty could relate. Early in 1972, Marge's sudden death was written into the storyline. Stu later married Ellie Harper and helped Jo run the Hartford House, a modern incarnation of her old property, the Motor Haven Inn. Examples of the younger stories included the maniacal Jennifer Pace. Jennifer shot and killed Joanne's sister Eunice after a vision of Eunice's husband, John Wyatt, whom Jennifer was having an affair with, told her to do the murderous deed. Another popular story on the show was the budding romance between the characters of Steve and Liza Kaslow. 1980s. In March 1981, CBS made the decision to move Search for Tomorrow to 2:30 p.m., 1:30 p.m. Central in 1981, after airing at 12:30, 11:30 on CBS since its first episode 30 years before. Procter & Gamble proposed the following to CBS, expanding Search for Tomorrow to 45 minutes while reducing As the World Turns to the same length, and discontinuing the half-hour access period at 1 p.m., noon for local stations. CBS decided against eliminating the local time for the news, so Search for Tomorrow remained at a half-hour and As the World Turns kept its full-hour length. Instead, Search for Tomorrow relocated to the aforementioned 2:30, 1:30 time slot, despite P&G's lack of enthusiasm for the switch. In undertaking the move, CBS also returned The Young and the Restless, which had expanded to a full hour in February 1980, to its original time slot of noon, 11 a.m. Central. Although Search for Tomorrow continued to rank in the top 10 at the time of its time slot switch, its ratings dropped slightly in the 2:30, 1:30 p.m. slot, which prompted Procter & Gamble to insist that CBS return the show to its original time slot. As a response, however, CBS decided to cancel Search for Tomorrow in 1982, instead of renewing it. In spite of CBS' decision to take the show off of its schedule, Procter & Gamble showed no interest in giving up on the show yet due to the show's modest but still steady ratings. The company instead began seeking another home for it, as it had 6.5 years earlier when CBS had dropped The Edge of Night. Switched to NBC. CBS' final episode of Search for Tomorrow aired on March 26, 1982, and the show moved to NBC the following Monday, returning to its traditional 12:30, 11:30 time slot on CBS. However, as a result of the network and time slot switch, Search for Tomorrow now found itself going up against one of its former network mates, The Young and the Restless on CBS, instead of being part of a lineup that included the latter. Search for Tomorrow also found itself beaten regularly by the moderate but nonetheless higher-rated Ryan's Hope on ABC. Furthermore, while the 12:30, 11:30 slot was less prone to preemptions than the noon, 11 slot would have been, some NBC affiliates televised other programs in the 12:30, 11:30 slot, a practice going back to NBC's years of struggle in the 1970s. Thus, Search for Tomorrow experienced a dramatic and irreversible ratings decline on NBC. When Search for Tomorrow first moved to 2:30, 1:30 on CBS in 1981, its ratings were at a 6.8, which was half a percentage point higher from where they had been at the end of the previous season. The move to NBC resulted in the show becoming the second lowest-rated soap opera on television with a 3.4 rating. In one scenario that never came to pass, as reported by TV Guide in June 1979, Search for Tomorrow would have moved to 3:30, 2:30 Central. The Young and the Restless would have expanded to an hour in fall 1979 from 12:30 to 1:30, 11:30 to 12:30, and As the World Turns and Guiding Light would have remained at their 1:30, 12:30 and 2:30, 1:30 start times. respectively. These plans were ultimately scrapped. In an advertising campaign called Follow the Search, the stars of the show wished for its loyal viewers to follow Search for Tomorrow to NBC. However, CBS only allowed the advertisements if Procter & Gamble refrained from disclosing the network to which the show was moving in their advertisements, which had also been decreed for The Edge of Night before it moved to ABC in 1975. At the end of the final CBS episode, veteran actors Mary Stewart and Larry Haines asked the audience to continue watching the show as it moved to another network, and to locate the show and the network in their television listings. Although Search for Tomorrow had switched networks, it was still produced at the CBS Broadcast Center at 524 West 57th St. in Manhattan until December 1982. By late December 1982 or January 1983, NBC relocated the show's production to the Reeves Teletape Studio on Broadway and West 81st Street, the former home of Sesame Street. However, in March 1985, production of the show moved to the former Edge of Night Studios, the EUE Screen Gems Studios at 222 East 44th Street, where it remained for the rest of its run. Search for Tomorrow's ratings on NBC remained only half as high as they had been on CBS, even in the 2:30–1:30 slot. By this time, few viewers had interest in Joanne's final marriage to Martin Turner, which had taken place while the series still called CBS home. Search for Tomorrow finished second to last in the ratings again at the end of its first full television season on NBC, finishing ahead of The Failing the Doctors and actually finishing in a tie with Texas. Both of those shows failed to make it through the 1982–83 season. By 1984, the show mainly focused on two new families, the Kendalls and the McClearys. The McCleary family was headed by Matt McCleary, his twin brother Malcolm McCleary, Kate McCleary, brothers Hogan McCleary, Cagney McCleary, Quinn McCleary, and sister Adair McCleary. The Kendall family was headed by Estelle Kendall, Lloyd Kendall, and Mike Kendall, brothers Alec Kendall, Chase Kendall, Stephen Kendall, and sister Teresa Rebecca Kendall. In an interview for Guy McMillan's The Videote, Mary Stewart complained, "They have created a new program and they're calling it Search for Tomorrow." Stewart also believed that she was being eased out by the character of Kate McCleary. Regardless of the writer's intentions, ratings continued to fall. At the end of the 1983–1984 television season, Search for Tomorrow finished last in the ratings with a 3.2. It did climb out of the ratings cellar at the end of the following television season, but this was largely due to the continuing struggles of The Edge of Night. Search for Tomorrow returned to the bottom of the ratings list thereafter, this time with an anemic 2.9 rating for the 1985–1986 television season, and remained in last place from there on in. Only after a memorable attempt to bring up the ratings was they cancelled the show in 1986. A flood washed away the whole town of Henderson except for Joanne's residence and business. NBC did not cancel the show as it had no available replacement set to air. However, Procter & Gamble chose to end the program on the last Friday of 1986. On December 26, 1986, the final episode ended with senior characters Stu Bergman and Joanne Turner talking about the future. Stu asked Joanne what she was searching for, and she answered, "Tomorrow. And I can't wait." This segment was followed by a taped piece in which the cast thanked the show's viewers for their loyalty over the past 35 years, ending with a slightly tearful Mary Stewart saying, thank you all. They were wonderful years," and saluting the audience goodbye. The show also ended with the song We'll Be Together Again as performed by Lou Rawls. The series was replaced by the Tom Kennedy-hosted game show Wordplay, which aired until September 4, 1987. As had been the case in 2 of the previous 3 television seasons, Search for Tomorrow ended its 35-year run last in ratings, finishing its final year with the 2.5. Location shooting. As did many other soap operas, Search for Tomorrow featured segments of location shooting in the 1980s. In 1981, the show went to Hong Kong and Jamaica, the latter of which would showcase a romantic rendezvous between the characters of Garth Taper and Kathy Phillips. In 1982, prior to the switch to NBC, a storyline involving Travis Sentell took the show on location in St. Kitts. In 1984, the show involved ample location shooting to show the wilds of Henderson. In the final months of the show in 1986, the show's cast and crew went to Ireland to film a storyline with the McCleary brothers, who by that time occupied most of the storyline's main crew. The producers and writers included Joanna Lee, Ellen Barrett, Erwin Nicholson, John P. Whitesell II, David Lawrence, Fred Bartholomew, Mary Ellis Bunham, Gregory Lehane, Bruce Minix, Ira Serka, Harry Eggert, Nick Havinger, Heather Hill, Scott McKinsey, Bob Schwartz, Ned Stark, Diana Wenman, Andrew D. Wayman, Art Wolfe, Jeff Yinger, Ted Kubiak, Agnes Nixon, Irving Venderg, Ray Goldstone, Bernard Sofronsky, Ann Marcus, Wesley Smith, Millie Taggart, Tom Rachina, Harding LeMay, Joan McCall, Paul Avila-Mayer, Stephanie Braxton, Pamela K. Long, David Coulson, John William Corrington, Julian Funt, Jeannie Glynn, Charles Gusman, Frank and Doris Hersley, Leonard Cantor, David Lezan, Judy Lewis, Jean Rouverol, Henry Slessar,